Okay, continuing with Seth Anil in his TED Talk, Your Brain Hallucinates Your Conscious Reality. He is saying right now that hallucination is an uncontrolled perception. Therefore, we can redefine perception as controlled hallucination. Let's take a look at that for a second. Let us define perception, shall we? Let's just give a quick definition. Perception would be the signals that come through your five senses to your brain. Okay? Hallucination. Your brain believing that certain perceptions are real, which are in fact not there. Controlled hallucination. Your brain believing things which are not there but are. Your brain believing things which are there but are not. What is a controlled hallucination? Is it true that we are hallucinating? Because that's his first step away, isn't it? That this is we're just linked vicariously through our senses, and our senses have some nature to them. Therefore, we don't know the true reality. Now, I make the opposite claim. I say that our senses have some nature to them. Therefore, we are linked to the true reality. He says our senses have some nature, therefore we are not linked to reality. Because our eyeballs see light, therefore we do not know the true reality. All we know is our eyeballs' interpretation of light. We're just hallucinating these things. If you take that first step, and then you see that an hallucination makes you think that things are real which are not real, let me ask you this, Seth. How do you know what an hallucination is? How do you know when you're having one, or when someone is having one, or how do you know that they even exist? How are you able to discover that an hallucination exists? If your senses don't link you to the true reality, then how can you ever test whether or not any given perception that you have is actually accurate? You're saying that sometimes we hallucinate. It sounds like you're saying that sometimes we don't hallucinate then. Then why are you going and saying that perception is controlled hallucination? Then where do we start? If it's all an hallucination, then where do we start? When do we get off the goddamn ground to begin with, so that we have any perceptions to begin with, so that we know anything about reality to begin with? So he wants to say hallucinations can trick us, therefore everything is a trick. We don't know whether or not anything's a trick. How would we have ever figured out that the hallucinations are tricking us then? So this, ladies and gentlemen, objectivists in the audience, this is an example of the stolen concept. You take a given context and you define a concept within that context, and then you drop the context. And you say, now I've got this concept and I'm going to use this concept, and I'm going to use it anywhere I want, any way I want. And I'm going to drop the fact that that concept occurs inside of a given context. We see this with anarchy, right? We see the context of freedom. Freedom is something that occurs within the orbit of the law. When you have laws that restrict force from being used, and you have a group of people that punish people who initiate the use of force, and that rather complex structure is in place, then you have something we call freedom. And people take that idea of freedom, which is very difficult to construct and takes a lot of effort and a lot of time in civil society, and they take that concept and they say, let's wipe away with civil society, destroy it all, and we'll just have freedom. And that doesn't work well, does it? And this is context dropping in the context of our senses. We know reality through our senses, except sometimes when we have a fever, or if we're ill, or if we hit our head really hard, or if we're on drugs, or if we're drunk. And then our senses lie to us. Now, how would we know that they're lying? unless at some time they were true, and we could compare those states. If they're all just lies, if everything's a lie equally, then we would never be able to define what is an hallucination, and we would not have the concept of hallucination. We would not have a concept of a time when our senses were not linked to reality. We wouldn't have such a concept if our senses were never linked to reality. And that's what he's trying to do here. Saying, sometimes we hallucinate, therefore our senses are never linked to reality. It's just about the stupidest conclusion that anybody could make. For him, as a scientist and an educated man, to stand on stage and do it is pathetic. Let's see what else he has.
Controlled hallucination, in which the brain's predictions are being reined in by sensory information from the world. In fact, we're all hallucinating all the time, including right now.
We're all hallucinating all the time, including right now. See, this is just Kantianism. It's stupid, low Kantianism. He's hallucinating. He thinks that he's making sense. They say the world is all an hallucination. And I wonder how they escape the delusion, right? They say the world is all an illusion. That's actually the line from my poem that I wrote years ago. How do they escape the delusion? If we're all hallucinating right now, every single person, all of us, then what the fuck is he talking about? He has no information about anything real. He's just talking in his little dream world about his little hallucinations then. He has no link to reality then. He just said. What a moron.
When we agree about our hallucinations, we call that reality.
When we agree about our hallucinations, we call it reality. Would you have a reality on a desert island, Seth Anil? What if there were nobody around for you to agree with? Would there be a reality? Would you have senses? Would you have perceptions? Would you even have hallucinations, or do you require a group to have hallucinations? You see how stuck he is in the altruist mindset. He can't even conceive of a human mind working. He can't conceive of a human mind doing its basic stuff without other people being involved. We have to agree as a group on meaning. How pathetic and worthless a subjectivist Kantian altruist is this guy. What a cuck.
Now I'm going to tell you that your experience of being a self, the specific experience of being you, is also a controlled hallucination generated.
Your experience of being yourself is a controlled hallucination. There's no possible grounds he has to stand on here. If you step in front of a bus, you die. If somebody feeds poison to you, you die. If you don't eat your dinner, you'll go hungry. You are a self. You are you. What could he possibly say that contradicts or shows that we are hallucinating the self?
Now this seems a very strange idea, right? Yes, visual illusions might deceive my eyes, but how could I be deceived about what it means to be me? For most of us, the experience of being a person is so familiar, so unified and so continuous that it's difficult not to take it for granted, but we shouldn't take it for granted. There are in fact many different ways we experience being a self. There's the experience of having a body and of being a body.
Now he just asked the question, how could I be deceived about being me? That's a little bit different of a question than that we're all hallucinating our individuality or our personhood. How could we be deceived about being me? I can imagine brain damage where you look at your arm and it doesn't seem to be your arm. Or where you look at your face in the mirror and you don't recognize the person because the area of your brain that recognizes faces is damaged. Right? And so you don't seem to be you. I could imagine some situation where that's broken. But how would we understand that that's broken if it weren't the fact that we are in fact objectively ourselves in reality? And therefore sometimes when it gets broken we say, oh, that is a damn shame that his brain was broken in such a way that he couldn't recognize himself in the mirror. Right? So what example would he possibly give then that would show that we're all hallucinating our personhood, our individuality? If that's true that sometimes we can be confused about our personhood, how would we be confused about our personhood if there wasn't some time when we understood that we do have our individual personhood, our individuality?
There are experiences of perceiving the world from a first-person point of view. There are experiences of intending to do things and of being the cause of things that happen in the world. And there are experiences of being a continuous and distinctive person over time, built from a rich set of memories and social interactions. Now, many experiments show, and psychiatrists and neurologists know very well, that these different ways in which we experience being a self can all come apart. What this means is a basic background experience of being a unified self is a rather fragile construction of the brain, another experience which, just like all others, requires explanation.
All right, so he says that it can come apart, this integration of what we call consciousness and our self-identity can come apart. And then he says, so that suggests that it's rather fragile. Okay, neither of those things, so let's say it is fragile, then how often do we see it come apart? Is it 1% of people? 2%? 5%? It certainly isn't 95% of people that their self-identity and their consciousness comes to pieces and they can't make sense of the world. Is it 95%? Would he say that? I would say it must be 1 or 2 or 5%. We would call them schizophrenics, mentally ill, unbalanced people, right? What percentage of people fit this description? And don't the rest of us then fit the description of being stable and balanced and our consciousness is in order? And what does that imply, Seth Anil? Doesn't that imply that we have some connection to reality and it's a real thing and our personhood is not an illusion? How could our personhood all be an illusion if those few people over there with a broken personhood look so different and so strange and their lives are so screwed up and their minds are so messed up that we set them aside in a separate group and we say their identity has been broken or their consciousness has been broken in some way that you're claiming? You're setting them aside saying that something's gone wrong or they've got some anomaly or something. What anomaly would it be? The anomaly separating them from normal people who are actually integrated with reality and have an actual consciousness and an actual identity, right? But no, nobody has any consciousness or any identity because it can be broken. It's possible for your consciousness to be broken. It's possible for you to have a stroke and then part of reality doesn't make sense, or for you to get drunk and take drugs and then reality doesn't make sense. It's possible for your brain to be broken. Therefore, everything about your personhood is an hallucination. Now that's just Immanuel Kant. That is cheap garbage. Immanuel Kant. That conclusion doesn't follow. There's no basis for the premise to begin with, and the conclusion that he tries to make doesn't even follow. It is transparently thin.
Let's return to the bodily self. How does the brain generate the experience of being a body and of having a body? Well, just the same principles apply.
How does the brain generate the experience of being a body and having a body? It doesn't. The brain receives the experience of being a body and having a body. And it compiles that experience. And it feeds back to the world as the senses are acting in the world. It says, oh, we've done this before. Oh, we've seen this before. Oh, we've done this before. Oh, we've seen this before. Oh, we've done this before. Oh, we've seen this before. That's all your brain does. It says memory, 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 had this, seen this, had this. Like with the cup that was blocking the squares with the shadow, and your brain was like, oh, I've done this, I've seen shadows before, I get this one. If they're both the same color, but one's in a shadow, that means that the one that's in the shadow must be a different shade than the other one, because they look like they're the same right now, but one's in shadow. I've done this. And so your brain tells you what's going on. Your brain's just giving you memories, true memories of your actual perceptions of history.
It makes its best guess about what is and what is not part of its body. And there's a beautiful experiment in neuroscience to illustrate this. And unlike most neuroscience experiments, this is one you can do at home. All you need is one of these and a couple of paintbrushes. Now in the rubber hand illusion, a person's real hand is hidden from view, and that fake rubber hand is placed in front of them. Then both hands are simultaneously stroked with a paintbrush while the person stares at the fake hand. Now for most people, after a while, this leads to the very uncanny sensation that the fake hand is in fact part of their body. And the idea is that the congruence between seeing touch and feeling touch on an object that looks like a hand and is roughly where a hand should be is enough evidence for the brain to make its best guess that the fake hand is in fact part of the body. So you can measure...
I think that proves right there. If you can set up a little experiment like that, it proves right there that our senses are linking us to reality. And our brain's very concerned about reality and about what might be going on in reality. And it's trying very careful to make sure that we're okay. So the fact that our brain is that careful about things, about preserving our personhood and our individuality, the fact that our brain is that careful about that, I think that shows that our senses are linked to reality, that we do live in a real reality, we do have individuality, we do have personhood, and our brain is trying to preserve it. That's all that proves. That doesn't prove... what does that prove? That you don't know where your body is? We've all experienced that when we have our shoes on and we move our foot and we say, oh my gosh, I didn't even know my shoes were on. Or when you move your feet and you say, oh, I thought I had my shoes on, that's my sock right there. Right? We've all experienced not knowing exactly what or where some little part of our body is doing. And so you check with reality? Right? Seth and Anil would say you can't do that. You're not linked to reality. I would say you just check with reality. Say, haven't had an update on my feet lately. Let me just do a real update here. And, oh, yep, shoes are on. Or shoes are not on, whatever. You check with reality, you get an update. It doesn't mean you're not linked to reality, because sometimes some people can be broken. It doesn't mean you're not linked to reality because you can fool your brain with carefully designed experiments. It doesn't mean that you're not linked to reality, that even when you design those experiments, you can't fool the brain, right? Here they designed an experiment trying to fool the brain into sitting there and watching a hand get stabbed with a fork right in front of it. The brain didn't go for it. The brain did not go for that. They designed and tried to trick the guy into getting stabbed. And the brain was like, I don't know exactly what's going on. Everything's a little weird right now, but I'm getting my hand the hell out of the way of that fork. And then in the next second you laugh because you say, well, obviously that wasn't my hand being stabbed by that fork. Yet, your brain, linked to the true reality and using your real sense perception from the actual reality, did not want that hand to get stabbed, did it? What hand? The hand right in front of you. Was it your hand? Your brain didn't have time to worry about that, did it? Even though they invented a scientific little trick here to try to screw with the brain, yet the brain still saw reality and still acted accordingly. Now you see how basic philosophy that they start with. They start with Immanuel Kant and Kantianism. Their basic philosophy they start with colors everything they see. And they see their whole experiment, they see all of the premises and all of the conclusions colored by Kantianism. Here we can see proof that we're linked to reality and that the brain is a very amazing, beautiful mechanism to try to preserve us in reality. What do they see? They see that the brain can be tricked. Ha-ha, we tricked the brain! Therefore, the brain doesn't know true reality because it's not infallible? Is that what he's trying to say? The brain isn't infallible. It is not a 100% God-seeing, all-knowing computer that can figure out every single little trick the scientists put in front of it. Therefore, you don't know real reality. That is just such a stupid line of reasoning, and all down to their basic philosophy. All down to the philosophy they start with. All down to their Kantian epistemology.
Kinds of clever things, right? You can measure skin conductance and startle responses, but there's no need. It's clear the guy in blue has assimilated the fake hand. Now this means that even experiences of what our body is a kind of best guessing, a kind of controlled hallucination by the brain. Now there's one more thing. We don't just experience our bodies as objects in the world from the outside, we also experience them from within. We all experience the sense of being a body from the inside. And sensory signals coming from the inside of the body are continually telling the brain about the state of the internal organs, how the heart is doing, what blood pressure is like, lots of things. And this kind of perception, which we call interoception, is rather overlooked, but it's critically important because perception and regulation of the internal state of the body, well, that's what keeps us alive. Here's another version of the rubber hand illusion. This is from our lab at Sussex. And here people see a virtual reality version of their hand, which flashes red and black either in time or out of time with their heartbeat. And when it's flashing in time with their heartbeat, people have a stronger sense that it's in fact part of their body. So experiences of having a body are deeply grounded in perceiving our bodies from within. There's one last thing I want to draw your attention to, which is that experiences of the body from the inside are very different from experiences of the world around us. When I look around me, the world seems full of objects, tables, chairs, rubber hands, people, you lot. Even my own body in the world, I can perceive it as an object from the outside. But my experiences of the body from within, they're not like that at all. I don't perceive my kidneys here, my liver here, my spleen. I don't know where my spleen is, but somewhere. I don't perceive my insides as objects. In fact, I don't experience them much at all unless they go wrong. And this is important, I think. Perception of the internal state of the body isn't about figuring out what's there, it's about control and regulation, keeping the physiological variables within the tight bounds that are compatible with survival. When the brain uses predictions to figure out what's there, we perceive objects as the causes of sensations. But when the brain uses predictions to control and regulate things, we experience how well or how badly that control is going. So our most basic experiences of being a self, or being an embodied organism, are deeply grounded in the biological mechanisms that keep us alive. And when we follow this idea all the way through, we can start to see that all of our conscious experiences, since they all depend on the same mechanisms of predictive perception, all stem from this basic drive to stay alive. We experience the world and ourselves with, through, and because of our living bodies. Let me bring things together step by step. What we consciously see depends on the brain's best guess of what's out there. Our experienced world comes from the inside out, not just the outside in. The rubber hand illusion shows that this applies to our experiences of what is and what is not our body. And these self-related predictions depend critically on sensory signals coming from deep inside the body. And finally, experiences of being an embodied self.
I just pause there for a second. It would be the academics who would do the experiment about the cylinder blocking the squares, and that confused them. And then they would say, oh, well, what about our body? Do we even experience our body in this way? Does our perception of our body even... And so then they would do the little hand experiment to see if that is even true too. See, they have to go through an experiment with each little iteration and every little thing, and they're confused by all of it. Now, if you had your head on straight and your philosophy proper to begin with, you would not be distracted by the squares appearing different and one being in shadow. That would not distract you. You could move on with your philosophy to other things. And you might be slightly distracted by, but not, I shouldn't say distracted, you might be slightly interested in the fact that you can trick your body into believing that there's a hand where there isn't one. But it wouldn't mess with your philosophy. It wouldn't mess with your perception of reality, or your idea of what reality is, or your idea of what perceiving reality is. Not if you had your philosophy in proper order and were correct about what you were thinking. Not if you were an objectivist. Not if you were an Aristotelian, you wouldn't be so confused by that.
More about control and regulation than figuring out what's there. So our experiences...
So our brain's more about control and regulation than figuring out what's there. What would it control? What would it regulate? Why would it want to control it? And why would it want to regulate it if it didn't know what was out there? Of course, the very first primary goal and activity of your brain and your mind and yourself is to interact with reality. He says we can't interact with reality, therefore our goal is to just construct our best guess. He just keeps going back to that statement. Our best guess about what reality is. When you're in a state where you're making guesses about reality, you're probably about to die. You've got some sort of bad situation. You're in the dark, you're blind, you're on drugs, you're drunk, something terrible's gone. We are linked directly to reality with our senses. We don't have to make our best guess. We have to figure out what our senses are telling us. It's not our best guess that shade behind the shadow and the shade that's in the light are different. That's not our best guess. That's true. We don't make our best guesses about reality. We perceive reality, and then we make our best approximation of what our action should be according to reality. There's no guessing involved.
The world around us and ourselves within it, well, they're kinds of controlled hallucinations that have been shaped over millions of years of evolution to keep us alive in worlds full of danger and opportunity. If it's an hallucination,
how does it keep us alive? We've evolved with a controlled hallucination. It's just an hallucination, but it works and it keeps us alive, but it's just an hallucination. What is your definition of hallucination then? I would like to know. How do you come up with the concept of hallucination? If all of us are just living in an evolved hallucination, now now do we even know what a hallucination is? Do we even have hallucinations? Are schizophrenics even hallucinating, or are we all just schizophrenic? Now, you see, Kantianism despoiling this poor man's thoughts. There he is saying that we all live in a hallucination, an evolved hallucination. Well, what if he saw it the other way, that hallucinations are what happened to schizophrenics and people on drugs? And we live in an evolved sensing machine? A machine that senses reality? Because that's what we actually live in. Not an evolved hallucination. We live in an amazing machine that gathers in sensory data and orders it and tries to survive. See, he's cut off from that idea. He's cut off from that realization. He's cut off from that path of thought. He's going to go wander around in his little fuzzy corner cloud with a dunce cap on pulled down over his eyes. Because he's got his philosophy wrong, and every single fact that he sees in reality, that we're evolved and we're able to survive, would tell him something, except he believes in Immanuel Kant's idea that the senses cut us off from reality. Since the senses cut us off from reality, yet evolved creatures are able to survive, they must be living in an hallucination that allows them to survive? That is so stupid. See? And now what's he going to do with that idea? What's he going to do with that? Use that to write additional essays? Derive additional concepts? Where's he going to go with that mess? What a moron.
Fix ourselves into existence. Now I'll leave you with 3 implications of all this. First, just as we...
Right, here's the implications. Good, that's what I just said. Where's he going to go with all that? Here's the implications.
Perceive the world, we can misperceive ourselves when the mechanisms of prediction go wrong. Understanding this opens many new opportunities.
The implication is that we can misperceive the world, and therefore we can also misperceive ourselves. Going back to my point, that we must be able to perceive the world. And we must be able to perceive ourselves then, mustn't we? So he says right out in the open, he says it right in front of us and right before us. We can perceive the world and we can perceive ourselves. Then, in the same breath, he says our senses cut us off from reality, therefore we can't perceive the world or ourselves. It's just philosophy. This isn't science. This isn't amazing. This isn't groundbreaking. This isn't informative. This is confused philosophy. This is not discoveries. This is not explanation. This is not evidence. This is confused philosophy we are seeing here. Nothing more. It does not enter the grounds of science. It is confused philosophy. He is talking about things which, if his philosophy was correct, could enter the grounds of science. In science, we could talk about why we would move our hand when someone stabs a hand in front of our face with a fork. We could talk about that. He can't talk about it because his philosophy is so screwed up that his conclusions just go off in wild, ricocheting directions.
Actually, in neurology, because we can finally get at the mechanisms rather than just treating the symptoms in conditions like depression and schizophrenia. Second,
how are we going to treat the mechanisms like schizophrenia and depression if there's not some real reality, if everything's an hallucination? How are we going to get those people back to a state of health if there's no state of health that we can check against? See, it's so bad to start out with a bad philosophy that when you get to a point where you want to do something useful, you say, plus we could fix schizophrenia. Could you fix schizophrenia if you believe that everybody is in a constant state of hallucination? Can you fix schizophrenia? I don't think that your philosophy is up to the task.
It means to be me cannot be reduced to or uploaded to a software program running on a robot, however smart or sophisticated. We are biological flesh and blood animals whose conscious experiences are shaped at all levels by the biological mechanisms that keep us alive. Just making computers smarter is not going to make them sentient. Finally, our own individual inner universe, our way of being conscious, is just one possible way of being conscious. And even human consciousness generally, it's just a tiny region in a vast space of possible consciousnesses. Our individual selves and worlds are unique to each of us, but they're all grounded in biological mechanisms shared with many other living creatures. Now, these are fundamental changes in how we understand ourselves, but I think they should be celebrated because, as so often in science, from Copernicus, we're not at the center of the universe.
These are fundamental changes in how we perceive ourselves? You see now how bad it is to have Kantianism at the base of your philosophy. You can fumble around with a couple of optical illusions and some little thing where you trick somebody into moving their hand when you try to stab them with a fork. And then at the end of it, you think that you've fundamentally changed the way that we perceive ourselves or reality or our perception of reality or something. You think you've actually done some philosophical work. You think you've actually done anything at all by sitting around and looking at a couple of optical illusions and saying, we don't know reality. How lame is this guy? How lame is Kantianism? Kids, be cool. Be an objectivist. And skip your coffee tomorrow, send me some money on Patreon, and let me build up a stream. Let me build up a revenue stream so I don't have to go drive used cars, which was so easy. BMWs and Mercedes, they're calling me now. I can hear them. They're saying, come drive these easy cars around. You're not making a lot of money on YouTube there. So vote for me, folks. Go give me some Patreon.